The first part of our story follows Elias, a former adrenaline seeker whose life was upended 2 years ago by a freak accident that left him paralyzed from the shoulders down. He lives in a secluded, modern estate on the rugged coast of Maine, a glass and stone structure that once felt like a sanctuary but now feels like a high-tech prison. Elias is brilliant, acerbic, and deeply nihilistic, having exhausted every medical trial and physical therapy session available. His world has shrunk to the size of his motorized chair and the view of the Atlantic through floor-to-ceiling windows. Into this stagnant environment comes Clara, a young woman from the nearby fishing village who has never traveled further than the next county. Clara is vibrant, eccentric in her dress, and desperate for work after the local bakery, where she worked for years, shuttered its doors. She has no experience in caregiving, but Elias's mother, Elena, hires her out of a sense of desperation, hoping Clara's unshakable optimism might provide a spark of life for her son. The initial weeks are a grueling exercise in patience. Elias treats Clara with cold indifference, attempting to drive her away with biting sarcasm and long periods of stony silence. He resents the babysitter role she represents. Clara, however, is fueled by her family's financial struggles and a stubborn refusal to be intimidated. She talks to him even when he won't reply, narrating the local gossip and the changing tides. The ice begins to break one afternoon when Elias tries to humiliate her by critiquing her lack of worldly knowledge, only for Clara to fire back with a sharp, witty defense of her own life's value. For the first time in years, someone treats Elias not as a tragic figure or a patient, but as a man capable of holding a conversation and losing an argument. This shift in dynamic opens the door to a tentative friendship. They begin to watch foreign films together, and Elias starts to share his love for the complex music and literature he had abandoned since his injury. As the weeks turn into months, Clara discovers the darker reality of Elias's situation. While cleaning his study, she finds documents detailing his intent to travel to a specialized clinic in Switzerland to end his life. She learns that he has given his parents 6 months of his time before he carries out the decision. Horrified and heartbroken, Clara initially wants to quit, unable to bear the thought of becoming close to someone who is planning their own exit. However, she eventually decides to stay, forming a secret pact with Elena to change Elias's mind. Clara begins a mission to show him that a life with physical limitations can still be a life filled with meaning and joy. She plans a series of excursions, starting small with trips to the local gardens and escalating to more ambitious outings. Their first major trip is to a local horse racing event, which ends in a comedy of errors involving a muddy field and a broken wheelchair ramp. Instead of the disaster Clara feared, the absurdity of the situation makes Elias laugh, a genuine, deep sound he hasn't made in years. They grow closer, sharing intimate details of their fears and dreams. Elias encourages Clara to expand her horizons, telling her she is too big for their small town and that she shouldn't settle for a mundane life out of a sense of duty to her family. Meanwhile, Clara's boyfriend, a fitness-obsessed man named Julian, grows increasingly jealous of the time she spends at the estate. Julian represents the life Clara is supposed to want: stable, predictable, and local. But his inability to understand her connection with Elias creates a widening rift. Clara's efforts culminate in a lavish trip to a tropical island in the Azores. She meticulously plans every detail to ensure the environment is accessible, determined that this will be the moment Elias realizes he wants to live. Under the starlit sky and the sound of the Portuguese surf, the bond between them transcends that of caregiver and patient. They share a profound, romantic connection, and Clara finally confesses her love and her knowledge of his plans for Switzerland. She begs him to reconsider, offering him a future with her, no matter how difficult the logistics of his care might be. Elias is deeply moved, admitting that the time spent with her has been the only happiness he has known since his accident. However, the first batch of their journey ends on a bittersweet note. Despite his love for her, Elias explains that his decision wasn't born out of a lack of love or beauty in his life, but a fundamental inability to reconcile his current existence with the man he used to be. The second part of the narrative begins with the heavy, silent flight back to Maine. The bubble they lived in during the vacation has popped, replaced by the stark reality of the ticking clock. Clara is devastated, feeling as though she has failed in her ultimate mission. She retreats to her family home, unable to look at Elias without seeing a ghost. Her relationship with Julian finally collapses when he dismisses her grief, unable to comprehend why she would care so deeply for someone who wanted to leave anyway. Clara realizes that Elias was right. She has outgrown her old life, but the cost of that growth feels unbearable. She spends days and a days, haunted by the memory of the Azores and the look in Elias's eyes when he told her she was the best thing that ever happened to him. Back at the estate, Elias prepares his final affairs. His father remains distant and angry, unable to process the choice, while Elena is a shell of a woman, torn between her love for her son and her horror at his plan. Elias writes letters, settles his estate, and spends hours staring at the sea. He finds that his resolve hasn't weakened, but his perspective has shifted. He sees the impact he has had on Clara and realizes that his final act of love must be to ensure she doesn't spend her life mourning him in a small village. He makes a series of secret arrangements, working with his lawyers to create a safety net for her that she won't discover until he is gone. A few days before his scheduled departure for Switzerland, Elias sends for Clara. He tells her he needs her to be there, not to change his mind, but to be his witness and his final memory. Clara is initially resistant, her pain manifesting as anger. She accuses him of being selfish and of throwing away the love they found. They have a final, explosive confrontation where the raw truth of their situation is laid bare. Elias explains that loving her has made his decision harder, but it has also made it more right, because he can finally leave knowing he experienced a true, soul-deep connection. He tells her that he cannot live a life of constant physical pain and total dependency, even for her. Eventually, Clara's anger gives way to a profound, tragic acceptance. She realizes that truly loving him means respecting his autonomy, even when it destroys her heart. The journey to the clinic in Switzerland is hushed and clinical, a sharp contrast to the vibrant colors of their island vacation. In the final hours, the atmosphere is surprisingly peaceful. Clara stays by his side, reading to him and holding his hand. They speak of what-ifs and might-have-beens, but mostly they focus on the now. Elias gives her a final letter and instructions not to open it until she is in Paris, at a specific cafe he loved. The end comes quietly, surrounded by the sterile comfort of the facility and the presence of his family. Clara is the last person he sees, and her face is the last thing he carries with him. The world continues to turn, but for Clara, the light has fundamentally changed. The story concludes weeks later in Paris. Clara is sitting at a small bistro on a bustling street, wearing the eccentric, colorful stockings that Elias always teased her about. She opens his letter. In it, he tells her that he has left her enough money to finish her education and start a life of her own, free from the financial burdens of her family. He tells her to live boldly, to push herself, and to never settle for a good enough life. He instructs her to go to a specific perfumery and buy a scent that reminds her of their time together. As she walks through the streets of Paris, Clara feels a mixture of crushing grief and soaring possibility. She is no longer the girl from the fishing village. She is a woman shaped by a tragic, beautiful love. She realizes that Elias didn't just change her life, he gave her the courage to actually live it. She looks up at the Parisian sky, takes a deep breath, and begins to walk toward her new future, carrying him with her in every step. The transition from late summer into the biting chill of a Maine autumn brought a new, quiet intensity to the estate. Elias had always hated the way the light turned thin and gray over the Atlantic, but with Clara there, the shadows seemed less oppressive. She had taken to bringing in bundles of dried lavender and eucalyptus, hanging them in the corners of his room to combat the sterile, medicinal scent that usually lingered. They spent long afternoons in the library, a room Elias had avoided for years because the sight of the high shelves reminded him of the books he could no longer reach or hold. Clara solved this by reading aloud, her voice rhythmic and steady against the sound of the wind rattling the heavy glass panes. She chose classic mysteries and intricate historical dramas, often stopping to debate the motives of the characters, forcing Elias to engage his sharp, analytical mind. During these sessions, the power dynamic continued to blur. Clara began to ask him for advice on her own life, specifically regarding her younger sister's education and her father's job hunt. Elias, who had once managed a multimillion-dollar venture capital firm, found a strange satisfaction in helping her navigate the small-town logistics of employment and grants. He taught her how to negotiate, how to spot a bad deal, and how to project a confidence she didn't yet feel. In return, she taught him the nuances of the village, which fishermen were secretly soft-hearted, which shopkeepers gave the best discounts to regulars, and the local legends of the ghosts that haunted the craggy coastline. It was a trade of two very different worlds, and in the exchange, they both found a sense of purpose they hadn't expected. However, the shadow of the 6-month deadline remained a constant, invisible presence. Elena, Elias's mother, watched them from the hallways with a mixture of hope and terror. She saw the way her son's eyes followed Clara across the room, the way he occasionally smiled, a real, unforced expression, and she prayed that the girl was enough. But Elias was a man of his word, and his physical condition remained a relentless thief. One night, a sudden autumn storm caused a power outage at the estate. The backup generators failed to kick in immediately, and the specialized equipment in Elias's room began to beep a shrill, rhythmic warning. The darkness was absolute. Clara stayed with him, her hand resting on his shoulder to ground him in the dark. For the first time, Elias spoke about the sheer terror of his own body, the feeling of being trapped in a suit of armor that was slowly rusting shut. He admitted that while she had brought light into his world, the light only made the darkness of his physical reality more visible. As the first frost settled over the gardens, Clara decided to take a gamble. She organized a living room gala, inviting a few of Elias's old friends from the city who hadn't seen him since the accident. She spent days preparing, coordinating with the chef to create a menu of Elias's favorite childhood comfort foods, and decorating the main hall with hundreds of fairy lights. When the guests arrived, the atmosphere was initially stiff and awkward. His old colleagues spoke to him in hushed, overly sympathetic tones, treating him like a fragile relic. But Clara wouldn't allow it. She moved through the room like a whirlwind, forcing conversation, challenging the guests to games, and making sure the wine kept flowing. Slowly, the tension broke. By midnight, they were all laughing over old stories of board meetings gone wrong and disastrous hiking trips. For a few hours, Elias wasn't a patient. He was the smartest man in the room again. When the last guest left and the house fell silent, Elias looked at Clara, who was tired but glowing with the success of the night. He thanked her not just for the party, but for the dignity of being seen as a peer. It was after this night that he began the secret work with his legal team, drafting the documents that would eventually change Clara's life in Paris. He watched her meticulously, noting her favorite colors, the way she hummed when she was focused, and her hidden desire to study art history. a dream she had suppressed because it felt too impractical for a girl from the village. He realized that his legacy wouldn't be his business success or his family name, but the trajectory of this one woman's life. The final weeks were a blur of bittersweet routines. They watched the first snowfall together, the white flakes disappearing into the dark waves of the ocean. They stopped talking about the future in long-term goals and began to measure time in heartbeats and chapters. Clara had stopped trying to fix him with grand gestures. Instead, she focused on the intimacy of the mundane. She learned the exact temperature he liked his tea, the specific way to position his pillows to ease the ache in his neck, and the look he gave when he wanted to be alone without having to say a word. She was becoming his memory, and he was becoming her compass. Despite the looming end, there was a profound sense of peace in the house. A quiet, tragic understanding that they were two people who had found each other at exactly the wrong time. And yet, it was the only time that mattered.